makes you go into a happy space. So, hello, and so good to be with you all this morning. Um, you know, we as a practitioner core underwent a deepening in regards to how we show up for you and how we show up for our center. And we uncovered some wonderful gifts, some pearls, a lot of light to shine upon you so that we can shine upon the world. Because we truly are the beacon of light. We are the Centers for Spiritual Living Prescott. And there is nothing quite like us if you really think about it. You know, we travel out here and we're in the middle of nowhere, really. But yet, we're everywhere. And so if we can transition that and transcend that thought, it's like, what a unique space and a unique place. And for each one of us to show up authentically as a unique space. And so as we will move into a new consciousness, we're going to be sharing those pearls of wisdom with all of you and to serve our purpose, which is to teach and to pray and to know the truth of your being, always. So we are excited and rejuvenated, and the center has gone through some changes. And you know what? I see great things for this center because I see each one of you here engaged, because without you, there is no center. And so you're important here. You're valued here. And what you can contribute is your light. And speaking of light, I am so blessed to talk a little bit about a light. You know, I first heard of our guest speaker today, David Ault, in a distant conversation. Originally, I came from the Centers for Spiritual Living in Las Vegas, and someone had spoken about David as a great teacher, and that he was a reverend in Atlanta. And I started doing a little investigation. You know, whenever you hear a word or you hear about somebody, you know, it kind of passes, and then I go a little deeper. And so I found out a little bit more about David. And so what do? I friend him on Facebook, you know. I want to know more about David. And so, shocker, he accepted my friend request. And then I started finding out more about David. And, you know, I've had the pleasure of being with him since Friday. And I'll be with him until tomorrow. And there are pearls of wisdom that he brings forth to explore and to examine. And I wrote up a little bio about him that I really want to share. I have too many electronic devices. So David Ault is a practitioner. He's a reverend. He's an author. He's a teacher. He's a thought transformer. He's a global advocate for education for impoverished areas in our world. In Atlanta, he served as a dean to a council of multi-generational, multi-faith leaders who assisted in dissolving systemic issues of unworthiness, bias, and racism, and builds new mental equivalents of equality. I think the wonderful thing that I learned about David this weekend is his passion. And he is living his passion and founded Kaleidoscope Child Foundation, whose mission is to advance vulnerable children and communities worldwide with sustainable education. How blessed are we? Beginning more than 16 years ago, he started this foundation. And he operates in Cambodia, in India and in Guatemala. And that is his passion now, is to serve in greater ways. He's author of his book that I'm bringing out called The Grass is Greener Right Here. And these books will be available for sale because he is a teacher. And so if you want to go deeper, I highly recommend getting this book because I can't wait to read it. So, without further ado, I bring to our center the magnificent, beautiful being of light, David Ault.
Good morning. I have been with your practitioners all weekend, and I want to see if they're brave enough to stand up and show their battle scars from the retreat. So I want you to give these people a hand. Yes, thank you. I'm in deep admiration for their commitment to sit in proxy for you. So the work that they were doing as practitioners was not just for themselves to go deeper, but it was to be a presence and to be a solid lighthouse for this community as well. And I'm here to testify that each and every one of them went deep. And it was a beautiful thing to witness and to be a part of. And I can't help but wait to see the fruits that are bared from that particular retreat. So, and I get to stay here this Sunday and be with you. So thank you so much. I have a little catchphrase that's sort of been my brand logo now for, gosh, probably 15 years. And it's solution already exists. And what that means to me is it's a part of our teaching that sometimes we don't really sit and contemplate. And it's the idea that you and I create nothing. I know. Hold on, take a breath. Because everything is already created. And when we think about the cosmology, when we think about the quantum field of the all, what we are privileged and honored and prodded to do is to access that from that field. Meaning that we're not discovering anything, we are uncovering that which already is, including the remembrance and the connection of ourself as a divine being. And so it's a process depending upon where we are in our path of self-awareness. But I find it comforting, actually, to think that solution already exists. So I don't know about you, but when I forget and I go into this kind of anxiousness and this ideology that thinks that I have to figure it out, and then I get into my small-mindedness, I can pause and I can breathe and I can go, solution already exists. And then, as Ralph Waldo Emerson says, I get my bloated nothingness out of the way. And sure enough, every single time I adhere to that, there is the solution waiting patiently for me to just calm down and to welcome it. And so there are many things that I want to speak to you around this idea of solution already existing. And I am here to tell you there are things that you already know. But I believe that there's only two things that are ever going on: remembering and forgetting. And sometimes we just forget more than we remember. And I had this feeling as I was standing in your lobby today, because people are coming up to me and go, do you remember me from 1863? Do you remember me from 1912? So many different churches, because I've been doing this for a long time. And in fact, on the front row is David and Rosie, who I'm told I almost married 11 years ago or something like that in New York City. But I had a commitment overseas, and they got married anyway. And I'm responsible for their marriage, and now I'm responsible for the children that are sitting on the front row. Sue came up to me, and she reminded me that she had been in a class of mine when I started a center in Mobile, Alabama. Someone else came to me and said, do you remember Firelight in San Jose? And all of a sudden, I had the temptation to feel old. But I decided that I would feel seasoned instead. And so I stand before you as a well-seasoned person, doing my best to embody this principle that we call the science of mind. this metaphysical teaching that tells us that solution already exists. And so I'm going to ask you to do something crazy this morning. Are you ready? I want you to take your hands. Usually I do this with like church bulletins, but we're not, most of us are not operating from that way anymore. So I want you to take your hands and I want you to put them in front of your face. Like literally block your vision, okay? And no cheating. I want it to be completely dark. All right, so what does this represent? This is your anxiousness. This is your worry. This is about what's going to happen at the end of the month. This is about the medical diagnosis. This is about the trauma and the drama that is happening within the family dynamic. This is about the concern and the worry about your dear friend or your spouse. This is about your anxiousness over a diagnosis. So many things. And I want you to get really, really used to looking and seeing that thing that's in front of you. And with your hands still up, I want you to finish this quote. I can't see the forest for the... And so what is in front of you is the tree. And it is the tree of whatever personal problem that you are focused on. And with your hands still up, I want you to answer a question for me. Do you know that there is something beyond your hands? Why? Why do you know this? Because you've had an experience of it. You know that when you put your hands down, that you're going to see a stage and you're going to see lights. And so that's because you have an awareness of something beyond the impediment of your hands. So you can take them down now. And so what I have come to appreciate about the idea that I can't see the forest for the trees is that every time I'm a tree person, I'm forgetting that solution already exists. And so being a tree person simply means that there is a higher level of forgetfulness or unconsciousness that is leading the way in which we're navigating our lives. And here's how clever we are. Because we can be tree people for a great amount of time, then we attract other tree people. And what we talk about is everything associated with this. Even though we have glimpses and even rememberings of something beyond what I would call the forest, the infinite nature of all reality. And we get really clever with our identity about our trees. Have you noticed that if one of the trees is about a diagnosis, then all we do is we talk about our tree, and then we have other friends who have the same tree, and then we go to lunch and we talk about our tree. And if I have the tree of a relational upset, I tend to attract other trees who have relationships, and they're like, I know, right? And then we go to lunch and we talk about the tree of our relational upsets, forgetting that innately what is moving and navigating through this thing called life is this idea of harmony. And we've had harmony before. And what Jackson was referring to with regards to worry is I tried to introduce a principle to your practitioners around worry. And here's that principle. So our founder, Ernest Holmes, says this: we live in a universe that is a perfect patterning. I take that seriously. As a teacher of this philosophy, and 3 decades going on, well seasoned, I continue to renew my vow of bringing integrity to the principle that God is all that there is. I want to know what it is within me that forgets. I want to know what is within me that when I go all the way back to ministerial school, someone said that principle never wavers, not even for a special occasion. And I have so many special occasion trees that I prune and tend and fertilize. And I go, well, yeah, but I have this tree. This is a special occasion. And when I think about this idea that principle never wavers, not even for a special occasion, I'm less punitive about that. In other words, I'm less self-condemning, saying, going, you're just not getting it, David. And I switch that to being an invitation to going deeper. Show me what that means. Even when I'm this, show me what it means that God is all that there is. Because I don't want to just pray it. I don't want to just recite it from a book. I want to live it. And that is what I call being a forest person. So a forest person does not dismiss the tree because the tree is a part of its forest. It doesn't make the tree wrong. It loves it. It loves the thing that is the obstacle. In the Zen philosophy, they say that the obstacle is the path. And so we begin to not condemn or run away or bury our head or medicate or overeat or do anything to avoid the tree, but we turn to it and we love it. And as we begin to love this tree, all of a sudden there is a more spaciousness that we're able to navigate and to see that there's something more and something more and something more. And suddenly we have the experience of remembering, which makes you and I forest people. And I don't know about you, but the more that I become responsible for being in alignment with being a forest person, I get to hang out with more forest people. Isn't that silly how that works out? And I find that so fulfilling. And I also find that my commitment to being a forest person is in direct alignment with the science of mind principle that God is all that there is. So what does that mean? I don't run away from the conflict. What I do is I turn to the conflict and I go, okay, God, even in the apparent absence of, show me. Show me. And then I have to get quiet. I have to stop talking. I have to stop commiserating about the tree long enough to feel the space and to be able to listen to the song of the forest people that beckon me into uncharted territory. And I find that the more that I do this, the less concerned and the less attached I am to the identity of any kind of tree. One of the teachers that I absolutely love is Ram Dass. And Ram Dass used to try and teach people or show them that we spend so much of our life trying to be somebody. The being somebody is very much like trying to own our tree. And he said, as we spiritually mature, we start to realize that the real resilience, the real evolution, the bigger expansion of self-awareness is realizing that we're nobody. Because there is no us and them. And that all this energy and time that we have spent trying to cultivate to be somebody, this identity, is really only a micro movement on the path. But when we begin to dissolve that identity, we see that we're nobody, which then lends us to the understanding that we're everybody. And that's what a forest person operates from. The decisions then become not as what's best for me, but what's best for the forest. And have you ever made those types of decisions before? You know, in some of the Native American traditions, they think about such things and they say, before we make this decision, how will it affect 7 generations from now? And you start to see how expansive consciousness can be as we move through the world. And it becomes less about what's in it for me and more about what can I do to expand the we. And so today, in this idea of welcoming our forest nature, I want you to consider that you don't have to do anything to be a forest person because you already are. What we get to do is every time we become tied to the tree identity is we just recognize it. Just like this idea of worry. Remember, Ernest Holmes said that the universe is a perfect patterning. Do you know what else he said about it? In order for that to be true, then everything that exists in the universe must also be what? Perfect. Including you and I. Some of you are sitting there going, well, yes, of course. And some of you are going, ah. But no matter where you are on the spectrum of hearing that, I want you to just look at the deductive reasoning statement. So the premise is that the universe is a perfect patterning. That means, therefore, that everything that makes up the cosmology of this thing called the universe must also be perfect. That includes you. So when we say things like, God is everything, in and through all, in me, as me, through me, that's what that's referring to. But it won't mean anything unless you agree to go on the adventure of allowing your forest nature to come through. So that means things like, don't let a cloud be your permanent sky. Don't let anything that is a part of a labeling or an identity be the period. Let it be the comma. And you begin to see that it isn't about then turning away from, but turning to and loving that thing. So this idea of worry, what I was trying to share with your practitioners is that worry gets a bad rap. Why? Because I don't know about you, but in all of my spiritual career, I was told, don't worry. Worry is the negative use of imagination. It was, how poetic. I love that. But wait a minute. We live in a universe that's a perfect patterning. That means that every element of the universe must be what? Perfect. So I started to think years ago in a practitioner class when I was teaching it, we were talking about worry. We were talking about God is all that there is. And all of a sudden, what hit me is that we've been thinking and relating to this idea of worry as if it's a trigger. When I say the word trigger to you, how does that make you feel? A trigger is what? A reaction. It's like the pricking of a wound. It's the hitting and the pressing of an injustice button that lives subjectively inside of us, right? And I went, well, again, going back to the idea of the forest, the perfect patterning, God is all that there is. Then what if worry is a signal? You see, signal is different than a trigger. What's a signal to you? Directional, it's a guide, it's a sign. It says you might want to go this way. And then I began to see that the relationship or this thing that we have identified and called worry is actually a beautiful signal that says, hey, wait a minute. The thing that you're worried about is losing something that you've already had. So why don't you think about the time when you had it? So if you're worried about your health, that's because at one time there was some optimization inside of your body. So why don't you reflect upon that? Instead of hanging out at the tree, why don't you then encapsulate the expansiveness of the forest and return to that just in this moment in time and let your thoughts be centered on that? And what do we teach? Thoughts create. thoughts or energy. And the more that I begin to train myself and go, oh my God, I'm like hugging this tree here, gives a whole new definition to tree hugger, doesn't it? I'm hugging this tree here tightly. I'm hugging this tree here about my health. I'm worried about it. Worry then becomes a signal that says, I hear you. I hear you, my love. I hear you. Step back for a moment. Take a breath, because this is a signal to allow you to return, to pivot in consciousness to the infinite potentiality of the wisdom of your body. And you start to see how compassionate and how loving it is to remember. Because in my periods of forgetfulness, I kind of navigated through learning these principles at a time when such phrases as, well, what's in your consciousness to have created this, was kind of the norm. Ouch! And I've sort of taken on the mantle of being the one to make this philosophy compassionate and exciting and accessible, and honoring of the fact that, yeah, we're in a human skin suit. And so we're navigating and we're going through this curriculum, and there will be points when we will forget. But when we can notice the forgetfulness and go, I just forgot for a moment. When we begin to then take responsibility for that individually, it cannot help but permeate and affect the collective. That's where it gets exciting. Because you are no longer waiting for someone else to be your forest person. You are remembering that you are that. You are the one that you have been waiting for. And when you can get excited about that, when you realize that age has nothing to do with that, when you realize that your economic history has nothing to do with that, when you realize the state of your physical body has nothing to do with that, because consciousness is unlimited. God is consciousness. And you and I are enveloped in the infinite forest nature of consciousness. And so it's my mission to walk around going, solution already exists. You got this. Hey, forest person. It doesn't mean that we don't listen to the trees that come up for us, but we get really good at not identifying each other as the tree. Can you see the difference? Can you see how you can honor the humanity of someone and at the same time know for them their divinity? That's what a practitioner is. If you all get that, I'll give you your practitioner license. Don't tell anybody I said that. It just means that you practice this one thing. How does it feel when you hear that God is all that there is? And you go, I don't get it. Because I look out at this world and I see so much suffering. And you're right. On this single plane of existence, that is a ludicrous statement. But I'm also here to remind you that this single plane of existence is but one thread in a cosmic blanket. Scott told you a little bit about Kaleidoscope Child Foundation. And in 2004, I landed in Cambodia, and I would take people on sacred site journeys. You know, we went to Peru, we went to China, we saw all of the monuments, and Cambodia was on the list because I didn't know anything about Angkor Wat, which is the largest spiritual temple complex in the world, one of the ancient wonders of the world. And I was given the opportunity to lead a trip to Cambodia, and I said, sure, why not? We went to Thailand first, and then when we landed in Cambodia, something happened. You ever been somewhere and you go, gosh, this feels familiar? There's just this palpable feeling of arriving home that shows up, and that's what happened there. And for the people who were in that tour, it was the first experience of them seeing the delineation between the haves and the have-nots. There was extreme poverty. At that time, it had barely been 30 years since their own genocide, their civil war, where more than 2 million Cambodians had been killed. Watch the movie The Killing Fields, and you'll know what that's about. And yet there was this inexplicable equanimity that existed among the people. And as I began to move through that, the people in the group did something that groups always do. And they were like, oh my God, we have to do something. Because that situation, that life situation, was right in their face. And I was new to that response. And so I went to the guide and I said, look, I know that we only have a limited amount of time. These people want to do something. I know that it's not sustainable. So in order to maximize their desires, I want you to take us to the worst place imaginable. And he looked at me and he said, what? And I said, I know it's not sustainable. And I said, but if we're going to do something and they want to do something, then we might as well maximize this opportunity. I said, where are we going to go? And he told me about the Tonle Sap Lake, which is the largest waterway in that part of Asia. He said in the dry season, when the water recedes, that's where the refugees and the displaced and the poorest of the poor, that's where the orphan children wander. That's where all of the landmine victims go. So in Cambodia, you may remember Princess Diana. The last initiative that she was working on was trying to excavate the landmines that had been buried through the Civil War all throughout the country. A lot of those landmines were made out of plastic. And when they started to teach recycling, you can imagine a laborer or a farmer being in the field, seeing some plastic from the soil that had worn away, going to pick it up, and it was still a landmine. And so you had massive amounts of people who were missing limbs from these types of things. Children. And he goes, if you go to the Tonle Sap Lake, you will see this conglomeration of people who just hang there until the monsoons come and then they disperse again. And he goes, they're hungry, feed them. The children, they're starving, feed them. I said, feed them what? And we began to talk about indigenous digestive systems and how you can't just show up and how you can't just show up with anything and chaos. And it started to get really complicated. And I said, just tell me what to do. And he said, go buy local food from the markets. And then I will coordinate this. But you can't just show up. I've somehow got to get a message to the matriarch of this transient village. So even a transient village has a matriarch. And I don't know how he did it, because this was before cell phones were all rampant everywhere. But we went to the market. The people got very enthusiastic. We bought out 3 markets worth of local produce. And I went to pay for it. And guess how much it cost? $86. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, Forrest, even I can do something. So the germ of possibility was planted. And we got all of this into a series of vans, and we made our way down to the banks of the Tonle Sap. And sure enough, we got there. He had gotten a message to the matriarch, because there was well over 100 children who were sitting in the mud waiting. And we began to disperse this food, and it was orderly for about 7 minutes. And then off in the distance, another good 100 children started storming at us because they heard food. And then it was like a hurricane. And there was grabbing, and there was clawing, and there was me. And all of a sudden it was over. And we all stood there, and everybody was breathing really heavy. And this one woman in the group looked down at her shirt, and it was covered in tiny mud prints. And she said, oh my God, this is the canvas of humanity. I'm never going to wash this shirt. And she started crying. And you know what happens when someone starts crying? Then the next person starts crying, and then the next person starts crying. And I'm like, David, you're the leader. Keep it together. And I couldn't. But let me tell you something. This was not any kind of emotional bursting from pity. Something was coming out of me, and it scared me. And I'm looking all around, and there's no place to go but a stinky pontoon boat in the water. And I crawled as fast as I could on my hands and knees into that pontoon boat, and I started to wail. But it wasn't out of pity. It was the most strangest thing that had ever happened to me. Because all of a sudden, I started to realize that I was that child, and that child was me. It was a mystical experience. And here was the crazy part. I wasn't feeding them. They were feeding me. And that changed my life. And I shared a mantra with your practitioner corps that I had just seen right before that happened. I was on an airplane and I was reading a travel magazine, and this writer said the most powerful mantra you can ever say, like I'm on an airline and somebody in the travel magazine is saying the most powerful mantra you can ever say is, I'm available. And then he followed it by, look out. Because if you say it and you mean it, your whole life will change. In other words, your whole identity as this tree is going to fall. And you're going to start to see that there's something beyond, and something beyond, and something beyond. And everything that you held cherished about your identity is going to start to fall. Look out. So I give you that mantra with a caveat. That if you start to say, I'm available, you don't approach that mantra with control or ego. You approach that, I'm available, and allow that which is a part of the perfect patterning that you and I do not understand to begin to handhold us into the mystery, into the beauty, into the exquisiteness of what it means to see the world as the forest. And you don't have to go to Cambodia to do that. You can do that today. Because you see, my thing is, I'm not a big fan of the sage on the stage. I'm a great fan of what can we do that is practical. How can we take these intangibles and make them tangible? Because unless we're all in this together, then we're just manicuring our trees. And so today, after 17 years of I'm available, we have 2 campuses in Cambodia. We have 2 schools in India now. We help lift girls out of slave labor practices in Guatemala. And in spite of COVID, my little old foundation was able to keep paying our teachers. And when the schools were closed, we made sure that their families in those villages and in those slums were fed. I can't tell you how that happens. We're solely donor-based. I don't have some big organization sponsoring us. But I have a beautiful board of people who understand the way that I operate. They understand that my number one commitment is to be a forest person. And if they're going to come play, they must be forest people too. And somehow it works. And so I leave you with that this morning. It's like a ride, isn't it? An amusement park. Enter this ride if you dare. I'm available. I'm available. And so it is.
Thank you, David. Who else is available? Huh? It's just, think about that. You know, we're here for change. And change can only happen with belief. And imagine a world that works for everyone, which is our theme, global vision. And we were given an example of how a world can work for everyone. And so I invite you to go within. I invite you to connect with your tree. And knowing that one life, one love, one infinite possibility dwells within right here and right now. I know that as we unify with the energy of oneness, unify with the divine perfection of who we are. I know that in this state of consciousness, that all is possible because all is God. And so as we move forward today with the awareness of the forest, the awareness of divine direction, let us say, yes, God. Yes, God. Yes, God. I am available. I am available. Feel that energy in your body. I am available. And so I give great thanks. I give great gratitude for the awareness of my availability, knowing that all is possible in the mind of God. And so I release the words and the energy and the intention of it into the law of right nowness. Right nowness. Because it is happening right here and right now. And let us lock it in and seal it with, and so it is.